Tristan Valenti doesn't believe in mercy. At 36 years old, he runs one of the most feared crime families on the East Coast, a man who's buried enemies, crushed rivals, and built an empire so powerful that even the FBI treats his name like a loaded gun. He's worth hundreds of millions. He owns judges, politicians, and city blocks. He hasn't smiled in 4 years, not since his wife Nina took a bullet that was meant for him, bled out in his arms outside a hospital while he screamed her name into the dark, and no one came. Since that night, Tristan's made himself a promise: never let anyone close again, because everyone who touches his life ends up in the ground. He's kept that promise perfectly. He's rejected every woman his mother's thrown at him, shut down every attempt at connection, turned himself into something closer to a weapon than a man. And tonight, after finishing the kind of business that leaves blood on your cuffs and silence in your chest, he's walking alone along the Hudson River at 2 a.m, wondering if there's anything left inside him worth saving, when he hears something that stops him cold. Crying. Not the loud kind, the quiet, broken kind, the sound someone makes when they've run out of reasons to keep going but their body won't let them stop. Under a rotting pier, soaked and shaking, is a 27-year-old woman named Corinne Walsh, who hasn't eaten in 3 days, hasn't slept indoors in 3 months, and is being hunted by the same criminal underworld Tristan controls. She should be invisible to him. She should be nothing. Just another broken thing in a city full of broken things. But Tristan Valenti, the man who doesn't believe in mercy, does something he hasn't done in 4 years. He stops. And that single decision, that one moment of weakness, or maybe the first real strength he's shown since Nina died, is about to pull both of them into something more dangerous than any gang war, more terrifying than any enemy, and more powerful than either of them is ready for. This story isn't what you think it is. If it hits you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because this journey's just getting started. Standing just 3 steps away from her, no closer. 15 years of instinct in the business had taught him that a frightened person was like an animal backed into a corner. One more step could trigger the need to run or fight. The distant streetlight spilled down just enough for him to see her eyes, green, wide open, locked on the cuff of his shirt, where the smear of blood had darkened to brown but was still wet along the edge. She had seen the blood. Her whole body went rigid, like a violin string pulled to its breaking point, both hands clutching the worn-out backpack against her chest, her legs already folded into the posture of someone ready to spring up. She was going to run. Tristan knew it with certainty. She would run within 3 seconds if he didn't say something. This blood isn't because of you. His voice was low. He didn't try to soften it, didn't try to soothe her, didn't try to reassure her. He only told the truth the way he told everything. Corinne didn't relax. Her eyes stayed fixed on the blood, then slid up to his face, swept quickly over his shoulders, chest, and hips, searching for a weapon, searching for signs of danger. She read him the way a person reads a dark road, measuring every shadow that might be hiding a threat. She had done this many times. 3 months on the street had taught her how to look at a man within 2 seconds and decide whether to run or stay. What do you want? It wasn't a question. It was a wall. Corinne raised it with a hoarse voice, cracked at the end but still hard at the beginning, the voice of someone who had learned to turn fear into aggression because that was the only thing keeping her alive. Tristan didn't answer that. Instead, he asked something else. When did you last eat? Silence. The wind from the Hudson River blew through so cold that Tristan saw her breath turn white in the air. She was so thin that her flimsy coat clung to her collarbones, and he could count each knob of her spine when she curled in on herself. 3 days, maybe 4. She said it as if she were talking about the weather, as if hunger were something ordinary she had already gotten used to, and that made something inside Tristan's chest twist in a way he hadn't recognized in 4 years. Why do you care? This time, it was a real question. Corinne looked at him with the eyes of someone life had taught that kindness always came with an invoice attached. Men didn't stop at 2 o'clock in the morning to ask what she had eaten without wanting something in return. She knew that. She knew it deep in her bones, in her skin, in every bruise life had left on her through 3 months on the street and the 27 years before that. Tristan had no answer. He didn't know why he cared. He shouldn't care. 15 years in this world had taught him that getting involved in business that wasn't his own was the fastest way to die. Every connection was a weakness. Every weakness was a bullet waiting to be fired. Nina had proved that. But tonight, standing on the riverbank with another man's blood on his sleeve and emptiness in his chest, Tristan found himself doing something he hadn't done for anyone in 4 years. He took off his black leather coat, heavy, expensive, the kind of coat whose lining alone was enough to keep a person warm through a winter night. He didn't hand it to her. He set it on the ground, 4 steps away from her, then stepped back, so she could choose for herself. No force, no moving closer, no creating a situation where she had to feel indebted or afraid. He only set it down and stepped away. Corinne looked at the coat, looked at him, looked back at the coat. Suspicion battled the cold across her face, and Tristan could see the exact moment the cold won, when her body shook so violently she couldn't control it anymore. She reached out, slowly, cautiously, as if touching something that might explode. Her fingers closed around the cold leather of the coat, dragged it toward her, and wrapped it around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, just for 1 second. 1 single second in which she allowed herself to feel warmth without staying on guard. Then her eyes opened again, sharp as before. Tristan took out his phone and pressed a single number. Beck, I need a car. Riverfront location, under the pier south of the ferry terminal. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Beck Torrance was his consigliere, his right hand. The only man Tristan trusted enough to call at 2 o'clock in the morning without giving a reason. 14 minutes later, the headlights of a black car swept across the riverbank. Beck stepped out, 48 years old, his face expressionless, his eyes reading the situation in 2 seconds. He looked at Corinne, huddled in Tristan's coat, looked at Tristan standing 3 steps away from her, his sleeve still stained with blood, his face blank, but his eyes different. Beck had been with Tristan long enough to read those eyes, and what he saw in Tristan's eyes tonight was something he hadn't seen in 4 years. What are you doing? Tristan didn't answer. Silence. Beck looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then he opened the rear door of the car without saying another word. Because Beck Torrance knew that kind of silence. It didn't mean I don't want to answer. It meant don't ask again, because even I don't understand what I'm doing, but I'm going to do it anyway. And in 15 years at Tristan Valenti's side, Beck had learned that when the boss fell into that kind of silence, there were only 2 choices. Follow, or get out of the way. Corinne sat in the back seat, pressed close to the right door. Not because she was comfortable, because it was the place nearest the door handle. In the first 3 seconds after getting into the car, she had already counted everything that needed counting. Automatic door locks, the kind controlled from the driver's seat, which meant she couldn't open the door from inside unless the driver released them. Thick window glass, bulletproof. She recognized it because the edge of the glass was 3 times thicker than an ordinary car window. A partition between the front and back seats, dark tinted glass, so she couldn't make out the driver's face. The car was moving at about 60 miles an hour on the highway. Jumping out at this speed meant death. Slowing at an intersection meant she might live if she rolled the right way. She calculated all of it. Not panic, habit. 3 months of sleeping on the street, in alleys, under bridges, inside closed train stations, had taught her that survival wasn't instinct. It was a skill, and a skill had to be practiced every day. Every room she walked into, she counted the exits. Every person she met, she measured the danger. Every car she sat in, she searched for a way out. Tristan sat 1 empty seat away from her, close to the left door. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were turned toward the window, watching the city slide backward through the dark, but Corinne knew he was watching her through the reflection in the glass. She knew because she was watching him the same way. Beck drove. No music, no conversation. The silence inside the car was so heavy that Corinne could hear the wipers moving across the windshield, even though the rain had stopped long ago, and only a thin mist still clung to the road. The car left Manhattan across the bridge and took the highway north. Corinne realized they were leaving the city. Her heart beat faster, but she forced it to slow, forced her breathing steady, forced her face calm. She had survived things worse than a night ride with strangers. At least that was what she told herself. Where are you taking me? Somewhere safer than the riverfront at 2 o'clock in the morning. That isn't an answer. That's the only answer you're going to get until we arrive. Corinne bit her lip and swallowed the next question. She looked outside and saw trees replacing concrete, saw the roads grow wider, the houses farther apart, the fences higher. Westchester County. She knew this area because Owen had mentioned it before. Her brother had once said that real bosses didn't live in Manhattan. They lived in the suburbs, where the walls were high and the neighbors didn't ask too many questions. The car stopped in front of a black iron gate, more than 3 meters tall, with cameras mounted on both pillars. The gate opened automatically as the car approached, without Beck pressing anything, which meant someone was watching from inside, which meant they had known the car was coming before it arrived. The driveway was long, lined on both sides with oak trees planted in perfect rows. The lights bright enough to show the road, but not bright enough to reveal anything hidden in the darkness behind it. Then the mansion appeared. Corinne didn't know what to call it. Not a house. A house was something with a mailbox and a welcome mat. This was a fortress of gray stone and dark glass, 3 stories high, so wide that the lights couldn't cover the whole front. Guards stood by the side entrance. 2 men in black, arms folded across their chests, eyes sweeping over the car, then over her as she stepped out. She felt their stares like 2 laser beams on her skin. "Who are you?" Corinne asked when they passed through the main door. She had waited the entire ride to ask that question. Waited until she was standing on her own 2 feet. Waited until she was no longer locked inside the car. Waited until she had at least one direction to run if the answer was something she didn't want to hear. Tristan stopped and turned to look at her. The hallway light fell across his face, and for the first time, Corinne saw him clearly in full light. A sharp jaw, gray eyes, the kind of gray that wasn't warm, but cold, like a river frozen over. A faint scar ran from his right temple down near his jaw. Old, at least 10 years. The kind of scar made by a knife, not an accident. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things were often beautiful. Like a blade, like the barrel of a gun, like fire seen from far away. Someone whose name you shouldn't know. She didn't accept that answer. I need to know, so I can know whether I'm afraid of the right thing or the wrong thing. He looked at her for one more second, as if weighing whether the truth would keep her there or drive her away. Then he said it. Tristan Valenti. 2 words. 2 words. And she felt every drop of blood in her body drain down into her feet. Valenti. She knew that name. Not from the news, not from movies, from Owen. Her brother had spoken of the families as if he were reading a map of a parallel world. The world that had pulled Owen in. The world Owen had died inside. The world Corinne had been running from for 6 months, only to stand in the middle of it tonight. I want to get out of the car. She wasn't in the car anymore, but the words escaped by reflex. And what they really meant was, I want to leave here. I want to leave this world. I want to never hear the name Valenti or Morano or any name from the world that swallowed my brother again. Tristan didn't block her, didn't hold her. He only said one sentence. Out there, Morano will find you within a week. Not a threat. Just the truth, spoken in the flat voice of a man who had seen too many truths to bother decorating them. And Corinne knew it was true because she had been running for 6 months, and Morano had still found her everywhere she stopped. A shelter in Queens. Morano knew within 2 weeks. A shelter in Brooklyn. Morano knew within 10 days. On the street, it took longer because there was no address to trace, but 3 months was the limit. She could feel the rope tightening, feel the darkness watching her, feel time running out. She stood frozen in the mansion hallway, Tristan's leather coat still around her shoulders, her worn-out backpack in her hand, and she didn't know where to go. Soft footsteps came from the end of the hall. A woman appeared, 58 years old. Brown-gray hair pinned neatly at the back of her neck, wearing sleep clothes but fully awake, as if she had never been asleep at all, or had grown so used to being woken at 2 o'clock in the morning that it had become normal. Dorothy Hale didn't look at Tristan, didn't ask Tristan, didn't wait for Tristan to explain. She looked at Corinne. Just looked. And in this woman's eyes, Corinne saw no judgment, no curiosity, no pity, only recognition. The kind of recognition that belongs to someone who had seen many lost souls wander into this house and understood that the only question that mattered wasn't why, but what do you need right now? Dorothy brought a wool blanket from the hallway closet, thick and heavy, the kind of blanket that gave real warmth and wasn't there for decoration. She brought a cup of warm water. She brought a plate of toast with butter. Simple, plain, the kind of food a stomach empty for 3 days could handle without cramping. She set everything on the living room table, pulled out a chair, then stepped back into the kitchen corner without saying a word. Corinne sat down. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to hold the toast with both of them. She took a bite, chewed slowly, and tried to swallow through a throat closing with emotion. Her eyes stung, but she didn't cry. She didn't cry in front of strangers. She had made that rule for herself in the first month on the street, when she understood that tears out there didn't bring compassion. They only brought attention, and attention was something she couldn't afford. She finished the whole plate of toast, drank the whole cup of water. Her hands were still shaking, but not as badly. Dorothy watched from the kitchen corner, her eyes soft, not intruding, not asking, only being there, a warm and silent presence in the middle of the cold house. Out in the hallway, Tristan leaned against the wall beside the doorway and watched through the narrow gap. He saw Corinne eating with trembling hands, saw her trying to keep her back straight even though she was so exhausted her shoulders sagged after every swallow, saw her set the plate down when she was finished, fold the napkin neatly, and place it exactly where it had been before, as if she were afraid to leave a trace, afraid to take up too much space, afraid to exist too loudly in a house that wasn't hers. He didn't go in. He didn't know why he didn't go in. He only knew that standing there, watching a stranger eat toast in his house at nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, he felt something move inside his chest, in the place where, for the past 4 years, he had thought everything was completely dead. Corinne woke at 6 in the morning and lay perfectly still for 3 seconds, trying to remember where she was. A high ceiling, a heavy blanket, complete silence, no car horns, no drunk voices shouting, no rats running inside the walls. She sat up, folded the blanket neatly, placed the pillow back in its proper spot, and erased every trace that she had ever slept there. Then she picked up her backpack and walked to the door. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. She had eaten, she had slept, she had survived one more night. Now she would leave before the Valenti name dragged her deeper, the way it had dragged Owen down. The living room door wasn't locked. The hallway was empty. She moved quickly toward the front door, her heart pounding hard, but her steps even, not running, because running was a sign of panic, and panic drew attention. She had just touched the front door handle when she heard the sound of shoes tapping against the stone floor behind her. Slow, steady, one step at a time. Corinne turned around. A woman stood in the middle of the hallway, 65 years old, but upright like a sword driven into the earth. Her silver-white hair was pinned neatly at the back of her neck, not a single strand out of place. Gray eyes, the same cold shade of gray as Tristan's, but sharper, harder. The kind of eyes that had watched a husband be murdered, watched a 21-year-old son take command of an empire, watched 15 years of blood and power without blinking. Lorraine Valenti didn't ask where she was going. She didn't need to ask. She looked at the backpack on Corinne's shoulder, looked at her hand on the doorknob, and understood everything in a single second. So this is what my son brought home last night. Her voice wasn't cruel. Worse, it was flat, cold, as if she were reading the label on an object she hadn't yet decided whether to throw away. Corinne let go of the door handle. I'm not a thing. I'm a person. Lorraine lifted one eyebrow by a millimeter, just enough to show surprise, but not enough to admit it. In this world, girl, if you have no value, you're a burden. And burdens are removed. Corinne looked straight into her eyes. Every instinct told her to lower her head, stay quiet, make herself small, disappear. But she had been small for 3 months on the street, and it hadn't saved her from anything. Then open the door. I'll leave on my own. Silence. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Lorraine watched her as if weighing something on an invisible scale, placing Corinne's recklessness on one side and the danger of it on the other. Then she turned away and walked off, her heels striking the stone floor in a steady rhythm, without saying another word. But she didn't open the door for Corinne, and Corinne stood there, her hand touching the handle again, knowing she could open it, knowing she could step outside, knowing she could go back to the riverfront, back to the streets, back to the life she knew how to survive even as it killed her a little more each day. But she didn't open it. Not yet. 20 minutes later, Tristan called her into his study. The room was dark, the curtains drawn shut, smelling of leather and old whiskey, with a heavy wooden desk and black and white photographs on the walls of men who all had the same gray eyes. Tristan sat behind the desk, already changed into a clean shirt, the bloodstain from last night gone as if it had never existed. He opened a thin file in front of him. Corinne Walsh, born in Dorchester, Boston. Mother died of cancer when you were 19. Father left when you were 12. Enrolled in the nursing program at UMass Boston. Dropped out in your 3rd year to raise your younger brother, Owen Walsh. He read each line in an emotionless voice, like he was reading a financial report, and every line was a cut into the life she had never allowed anyone to see. Owen Walsh owed the Morano family $200,000 in gambling debt. Couldn't repay it. Killed months ago in a warehouse in South Boston. Corinne bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted blood. She didn't let him see her face change. She didn't let him see anything. After Owen died, you quit your job at a nursing clinic in Boston and ran to New York. Lived at a shelter in Brooklyn at first, but once Morano found the shelter, you took to the street, surviving outside day after day until last night. He closed the file. Corinne wanted to ask how he had gotten this information within only a few hours, but she looked around the room, looked at the photographs on the walls, looked at the cold, gray eyes of the man in front of her, and she understood. This was Tristan Valenti. He could find anything about anyone. That was power. It was also a warning. I have an offer, he said. My mother is 65, high blood pressure, chronic joint pain, and she refuses every nurse I hire. 4 of them in 2 years, and none lasted more than 3 weeks. You studied nursing. You know how to care for a patient. Stay here, take care of her, and help Dorothy manage the house. In return, I protect you from Morano. Corinne looked at him, searching for the trap, searching for the hidden angle, searching for the thing he wasn't saying. This is pity. No, this is a transaction. You need shelter. I need someone to care for my mother. No one owes anyone. He said it in a hard, decisive voice, like he was signing a contract, not saving a life. And Corinne understood that he was framing it as a transaction, because that was the only way he allowed himself to do this. Because if he admitted it was pity, he would have to admit he was still capable of feeling mercy, and that was more dangerous than any enemy waiting outside. What if I refuse? You walk out that door. I don't keep anyone here by force. A long silence followed. Corinne thought about the riverfront, thought about the shelter Morano had found within 10 days, thought about Owen, about her brother's face in the last photograph she still had, tucked into the small inside pocket of her backpack, wrinkled and blurred from rainwater, thought about the winter coming, and how she wasn't sure she could survive another one outside. Fine. She said it not because she trusted him, because she had nowhere left to run, and sometimes, having nowhere left to run was the only thing that forced a person to stop long enough to realize that maybe, just maybe, not every closed door was a trap. Some doors closed to keep her safe. She had just never met a door like that before. The first week taught Corinne that the Valenti mansion was beautiful in the way a golden cage was beautiful. Flawless from the outside and suffocating from within. Every morning she woke in the living room that had been turned into a temporary bedroom, listening to heavy footsteps in the hallway, to men speaking in low voices whose words she couldn't quite make out, though she could clearly hear the tone of orders, of threats, of things not meant to be said aloud. She saw them pass by, 2 or 3 at a time, dressed in dark suits, their jackets bulging at the left hip where guns were hidden, their eyes sweeping over her and then away again as if she were furniture. There were afternoons when Tristan held meetings in his study, the door shut tight, and through the thick wood Corinne heard his voice, cold, slow, each word like a bullet being loaded into a magazine, and the voices of the other men, tense, struggling to stay calm, the voices of men who were afraid, but weren't allowed to show it. Tristan disappeared every morning before she woke, and returned every night after she had already gone up to her room. On the rare occasions when she accidentally saw him in the hallway, his eyes looked colder than the day before, farther away than the day before, as if every day outside the mansion shaved off another piece of the man inside him and brought back a piece of machinery in its place. He didn't talk to her. She didn't wait for him to talk. A deal was a deal, not a friendship. Corinne focused on the things she could control. The kitchen came first. Dorothy had managed this house for 25 years, but she was old now. Her back hurt, and a mansion this size needed more than one person. Corinne began with small things, rearranging the spice cabinet in order, wiping down the kitchen shelves, washing the dishes before Dorothy could touch them. She found several empty pots in the corner of the storage room and asked Dorothy if she had any seeds. Dorothy gave her a small packet, basil, thyme, mint, and said Mrs. Nina used to grow them, but since she died, no one had touched them again. Corinne planted them on the kitchen windowsill. She didn't ask permission, didn't ask for anyone's opinion. She simply planted them, watered them, and waited. Then came Lorraine. That was the real war. Every morning, Corinne placed blood pressure medicine and a glass of warm water on Lorraine's bedside table. Every morning, Lorraine looked at the pill as if it were an insult. On the second day, she pushed the glass of water onto the floor. On the third day, she didn't push the glass away, but she didn't take the medicine either, only left the pill sitting there until Corinne cleared it away that evening. On the fourth day, she opened her mouth. "I don't need some wandering girl teaching me how to live." Corinne placed a fresh glass of water on the table, took the old one away, and didn't answer. On the fifth day, "Did you know Nina? Do you know what kind of woman she was?" Nina was a real woman. She belonged to this world. She deserved to stand beside my son. Lorraine looked Corinne up and down, slowly, centimeter by centimeter, as if making a comparison whose result had already been decided before it began. "And you're only a ghost Tristan picked up out of guilt." Every word was precise, deliberate, aimed directly at the place Lorraine knew would hurt most, because she was a woman who had survived 65 years by reading other people and finding their weak places before they could find hers. Corinne stood beside the bed, the glass of water in her hand, and felt each word drive into her chest like a needle. Ghost. Picked up. Guilt. Each word was partly true somehow, and that was why it hurt so much. But she didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't walk away. She set the glass of water down, said softly, "Yes, ma'am," then left the room, closed the door, went down to the kitchen, gripped the edge of the sink with both hands until her knuckles turned white. Then she let go, breathed, and began cooking porridge from the recipe Dorothy had taught her yesterday. That evening, she brought the bowl of porridge up to Lorraine's room. Lorraine didn't look at her, didn't thank her, didn't touch the bowl. Corinne set it down and walked out. The next morning, the bowl was empty. She didn't mention it. She only washed the bowl and made a new one for that night. Medicine and warm water every morning. Hot porridge every night. No conditions. No waiting. No demands. Dorothy asked her once why she could endure it. Why she didn't get angry. Why she didn't abandon Mrs. Lorraine the way the 4 nurses before her had. Corinne washed the dishes, looked out the window at the basil plants where small green shoots had begun to rise, and remembered her mother. Remembered the final months in the hospital in Dorchester, when her mother had grown so thin her bones seemed to push through her skin, when pain medicine no longer worked, when pain turned her mother into someone Corinne didn't recognize, irritable, bitter, pushing her away, saying cruel things they both knew weren't true. And Corinne had stayed, still sat beside the bed, still held her mother's hand through every wave of pain, because before the illness, her mother had once said something Corinne had carved into her bones. "Kindness doesn't need permission, sweetheart." She said that to Dorothy in a soft voice, as if she were speaking more to herself than to anyone else. Then she dried her hands, carried the medicine up to Lorraine's room, placed it beside the bed, and walked out without waiting for anything. 2 weeks passed in the same repeating rhythm. Morning medicine, evening porridge, Lorraine's silence, Tristan's absence, Dorothy's patient presence, and Corinne caught somewhere in the middle of it all, trying to take up as little space as possible inside a house that wasn't hers. She slept very little, not because the bed was uncomfortable, but because 3 months on the street had ruined her ability to sleep deeply. Her body was used to waking every 2 hours to check her surroundings, used to listening for strange sounds, used to being ready to run, and inside the mansion, which was so silent at night it felt almost eerie, that silence became a kind of noise she didn't know how to turn off. So she went down to the kitchen. Dorothy had found an old nursing textbook at the public library near the house the week before and brought it home, setting it on the kitchen table without saying anything, just leaving it there, the way Dorothy gave everything, with no explanation attached and no expectation attached. Corinne opened the book every night, rereading the chapters she had once known by heart when she was still studying at UMass Boston, letting her fingers move over the familiar lines, as if touching an older version of herself, the version who hadn't dropped out, hadn't lost Owen, hadn't slept on the street. That night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the book open to the chapter on blood pressure when she heard the door. Tristan stepped into the kitchen, and both of them went still. He looked tired, not tired from lack of sleep, but tired from something deeper, the kind of exhaustion that ate from the inside out, the kind she recognized because she saw it in the mirror every morning. His eyes moved over her, over the book, over the cup of tea that had gone cold on the table. He didn't ask what she was doing. She didn't ask where he had just come from. Corinne stood, poured tea into a clean cup, and placed it in front of him. She didn't ask if he wanted it, didn't say anything, just poured it and sat back down, opened the book, and kept reading. Tristan looked at the cup of tea, looked at her. Then he sat down in the chair across from her, picked up the cup, and drank. No thank you. 20 minutes. For 20 minutes they sat there, facing each other across the old oak kitchen table in the warm yellow light, without saying a word. Corinne read her book. Tristan drank the tea, then simply sat there, both hands wrapped around the cup, his eyes fixed on the empty space above her shoulder. It wasn't romantic. There were no exchanged glances, no racing hearts or heavy breathing. Only two exhausted people sitting in the same kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning, sharing space without demanding anything from each other, and somehow, that absence of demand was the most intimate thing Tristan had had with another human being in 4 years. He stood after 20 minutes, set the cup in the sink, and went upstairs without looking back. Corinne sat there for another 10 minutes, listening to his footsteps fade along the stairs. Then she closed the book, washed his cup, and wondered why 20 minutes of silence with that man made her feel less alone than 3 months on the street. 4 nights later, a knock on her bedroom door at 2 o'clock in the morning pulled Corinne out of a thin, broken sleep. Dorothy stood outside the door, her face pale, her voice pressed low. "Mrs. Lorraine." Her blood pressure dropped. "She won't let me call a doctor." Corinne didn't need to hear more. She rushed down the hallway and into Lorraine's room, where she found the older woman lying on her side in bed, her face white as paper, sweat beading across her forehead, one hand gripping the edge of the blanket. Lorraine opened her eyes and looked at her. And even in that state, those gray eyes still tried to hold on to their hardness, still tried to say, "I don't need you," without opening her mouth. Corinne didn't ask if Lorraine wanted help. She simply acted. Her hands were steady, not shaking, and the nursing knowledge from her 3 years at UMass Boston returned as if she had never left the lecture hall, as if it lived in her muscles, and not only in her memory. She checked Lorraine's blood pressure with the monitor Dorothy brought in. 80/50, dangerously low. She laid Lorraine on her back, raised her legs with 2 pillows, and loosened her nightgown. She mixed warm salt water and gave it to her in small sips, slowly, without forcing her. Then she pulled a chair beside the bed, placed 2 fingers on Lorraine's wrist, and counted her pulse. Lorraine looked at her. Corinne looked back. No one said anything. There was no need. Corinne sat there all night, counting her pulse every 15 minutes, changing the warm cloth on Lorraine's forehead when cold sweat broke out across her skin, giving her more salt water when her blood pressure began to stabilize. Her hand never left Lorraine's wrist, her fingers resting lightly against the pulse, following every beat as if she were holding the thin, fragile thread that kept Lorraine tied to consciousness. The first light of morning slipped through the curtains when Corinne slumped against the side of the chair, her head tilted to one side, her hand still holding Lorraine's wrist, falling asleep without realizing it. Lorraine woke. Her blood pressure had returned to 95/60, not good yet, but no longer dangerous. She looked over and saw Corinne asleep in the chair beside the bed, the crease of her sleeve pressed into her face, dark circles deep beneath her eyes, her hand still holding Lorraine's wrist. The girl had sat there all night, not because anyone told her to, not because of the agreement, because she had chosen to. Lorraine looked for a long time. Then she turned toward the bedside table, where the blood pressure pill and the glass of warm water sat in the exact same place they had every morning for the past 2 weeks. The pill she had never once taken by herself, the glass of water she had pushed onto the floor on the first day. She picked up the pill, put it in her mouth, drank the water. No one saw it. No one knew. Only Lorraine Valenti and that small, quiet, completely voluntary change. Tristan noticed the change on an ordinary afternoon, when he stepped into the mansion after a long day and caught the scent of basil. Not perfume, not chemicals, but fresh basil. That green, living scent he hadn't smelled in this house since Nina was alive. He stopped in the middle of the hallway, and in those 3 seconds, before he could raise his walls, he felt something move inside his chest, in the place where, for the past 4 years, he had believed everything was completely dead. Then he looked around and saw it. Saw the herb pots on the kitchen windowsill had grown, the leaves lush and green, spilling over the edges of the pots. Saw Dorothy in the kitchen, for the first time in longer than he could remember. laughing, truly laughing. Not the polite smile of a housekeeper, but laughing because of something Corinne had just said. Saw his mother sitting at the dining table, not in her bedroom, not curled up in bed resisting everything, but sitting at the table drinking tea. And even though Lorraine wasn't smiling, wasn't talking to Corinne, she was there, in the same room, and that was already a small miracle. The mansion was changing, slowly, silently, like the basil plants on the windowsill, unnoticed until they had already grown. And Tristan realized that the center of that change was Corinne, the girl he had picked up from the riverbank, the girl he had framed inside a bargain so he wouldn't have to admit anything else, the girl he had deliberately tried not to look at, not to talk to, not to think about for the past 2 weeks. And yet her presence had still seeped into this house like water seeping into stone, slow, patient, impossible to stop. And that terrified him, because the last time Tristan had allowed someone to change the world around him, that person had been Nina, and Nina had died. Died because she was close to him. Died because of a bullet meant for him. Died because he loved her, and that love turned her into a target. Tristan knew that rule in his bones and blood. Anyone who came close to him died. And he had held on to that rule like a doctrine for 4 years, pushing everyone away, closing every door, turning himself into a fortress just like this mansion, beautiful and cold, and refusing to let anything living grow inside. So he did what he always did when he saw something threatening his walls. He attacked. He found Corinne in the kitchen that afternoon, after Dorothy had gone, after Lorraine had returned to her room, when there was no one else there to serve as a buffer. She was washing dishes, her back turned to him, and when she heard his footsteps, she turned around with the calm eyes he had begun to recognize as her armor, the same way his cold gray eyes were his. "You're here because of an agreement." His voice was hard. "You take care of my mother, and I protect you from Murano. That's all. Don't confuse it with anything else." He saw the words hit their mark, saw them touch her in the place her armor didn't cover, saw those green eyes blink once, fast, like a light going out and coming back on. And in that darkened instant, he saw real hurt. Deep, old, the kind of hurt he hadn't caused but had just touched. Corinne looked at him, didn't argue, didn't explain, didn't say "I understand" or "I disagree" or "you're wrong." She only nodded, slowly, a nod Tristan recognized at once because he had seen it before, in the eyes of people so used to being abandoned that they were no longer surprised when it happened again. They only nodded, accepted it, and walked away. Her father left when she was 12. He knew that from the file. Her mother died when she was 19. Owen, the last person she had left in the world, had died 6 months ago. Everyone in Corinne Walsh's life had left, one way or another, and she had grown so used to it that she didn't even bother reacting anymore. She turned away and walked off, and just before she left the kitchen, her shoulder trembled. Once. Only once. So small that if Tristan hadn't been looking at her, he would have missed it. But he was looking, and he saw, and that tremor clung to him all night, like a thin knife cut he couldn't stop touching. He sat in his study, the 3rd glass of whiskey on the desk, his eyes fixed on Nina's photograph on the shelf. Nina was smiling in the picture, that smile of hers, wide and uncontrollable, the smile he had loved so much it became the thing he remembered most clearly, and the thing that hurt the most. He drank whiskey, and wondered whether he had just protected Corinne from danger, or pushed her away because he was too much of a coward to face what she made him feel. A soft knock came at the door. Dorothy stood outside, already wearing her coat, ready to go home, but she had stopped because she saw the study light still on. She looked at him, looked at the whiskey, looked at Nina's photograph, and understood everything, because she had been in this house for 25 years and had seen Tristan through every version of himself, from the trembling 21-year-old boy who took power after his father died, to the 36-year-old boss trembling because of a girl in the kitchen. "That girl isn't like the others. Mr. Tristan," Dorothy spoke gently, without judgment, without pushing, only speaking the truth the way she always did, plainly and undeniably. "And you know that." Then she left, leaving Tristan alone with the whiskey, with Nina's photograph, with the tremor in Corinne's shoulder that he couldn't erase from his mind, and with the truth Dorothy had just placed before him, heavier than any bullet he had ever fired. The bouquet arrived at 7 o'clock in the morning, placed directly in front of the mansion's main iron gate, where the cameras recorded a black car with no license plates stopping for exactly 15 seconds, just long enough for someone to step out, set the flowers down, and disappear. Beck was the first to see it. He was checking the morning shift when the guard at the gate called it in, and the moment he stepped outside and looked at the bouquet, he knew at once that this wasn't a gift. White lilies, 6 of them. The kind of flowers people placed on coffins, tied with a black ribbon, with a small white card attached, handwritten in neat, clear strokes, written by someone who wanted to make sure every word would be read plainly. Miss Walsh still owes us. Return the merchandise or pay in blood. No signature. No need for one. Beck knew that handwriting, knew that style, knew there was only one man in the New York underworld who sent funeral flowers with cards, as if he were sending dinner invitations. Franco Morano, 48 years old, boss of the Morano family, the man who ran gambling, loan sharking, and human trafficking networks from Newark to Atlantic City. Morano didn't kill people out of anger. He killed for profit. He didn't see human beings as human beings. He saw them as merchandise, assets, numbers on a balance sheet. Owen Walsh had owed him $200,000. Your brother was gone, but the debt hadn't died on that tragic night, and now Morano wanted to collect it the only way he knew how, using what remained of Owen's bloodline, Corinne. Beck carried the bouquet into Tristan's study and set it on the desk. Tristan looked at the flowers. Read the card. His face didn't change. Not a single muscle moved. But Beck saw his fingers tighten around the edge of the card until the paper wrinkled. Hand her over to Morano. Beck spoke in the flat voice of a man weighing strategy, not emotion. This isn't our war. She isn't one of ours. She doesn't belong to the family. She's an outsider you brought home, and Morano is using her as an excuse. Hand her over. The problem ends, and no one has to die. No. Tristan said it without looking at Beck, his eyes still fixed on the card. Beck drew in a slow breath. Mr. Tristan, I respect you. I've stood with you for 15 years, and I've never once questioned your decisions. But this is the moment when I have to speak plainly. She's a burden. Morano has been looking for an excuse to attack us for a long time, and you're handing him that excuse on a silver platter. Silence. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Tristan set the card down, lifted his eyes to Beck, and Beck saw something in him he hadn't seen in 4 years. Not anger, not coldness, something more alive than that, hotter than that, more dangerous than that, because it didn't come from the boss, but from the man behind the boss, the man Tristan had buried deep on the night Nina died. I said no. It wasn't a strategic order. It wasn't a calculation of power. It wasn't because keeping Corinne benefited the Valenti family, or because handing her over would set a weak precedent. It was simply no. And Beck, who had followed Tristan through 15 years of underground war, through bloody nights and mornings spent counting bodies, understood that this was the moment he feared most. Not because of Morano. Morano was an enemy, and enemies had ways of being handled. Beck was afraid because the last time Tristan had made a decision not with his head, but with his chest, the woman he protected had died on the way home with a bullet through the car window. And now he was doing it again. With a girl he had known for less than 3 weeks. Tristan ordered a full security increase. 2 more men on night duty at the West Gate. Every vehicle in and out checked. Camera monitoring 24 hours a day. No one left the mansion without an escort. And Corinne was not to know anything. Don't let her see the flowers. Don't let her read the card. Don't let her know Morano has reached the front door. Beck nodded, gave the orders to the security team, and had someone take the bouquet away to be destroyed. But Beck forgot one thing. Or more precisely, he failed to account for one thing. Corinne Walsh woke at 6 o'clock in the morning, earlier than everyone else. That morning, she had woken at 5:30 because she hadn't been able to sleep the night before. Not because she was afraid, but because Tristan's words from the previous afternoon were still turning over in her head. You're here because of an agreement. Don't confuse it with anything else. And she knew he was right, but knowing he was right didn't make it hurt any less. She went down to the kitchen to make tea and looked through the window toward the front yard. She saw the guard at the gate holding something. A white bouquet. And Corinne, the girl who had lost her brother to the underworld, the girl who had spent 6 months running from people who sent exactly this kind of flower, recognized it instantly. White lilies, funeral flowers. She set the teacup down, went to the front door, and crossed the yard quickly before the guard could take the flowers away. She snatched the card from the bouquet. Read it. The blood drained from her face so fast she had to hold on to the gate pillar to keep from falling. Miss Walsh still owes us. Return the merchandise or pay in blood. Owen. They were using the same language, the same kind of card, the same way of speaking Corinne had seen before her brother disappeared and never came home. The guard stepped closer, looking at her, then at the card in her hand, but before he could react, Corinne folded the card, slipped it into her coat pocket, and walked into the house. Her face was calm, her steps were even. No one looking at her then would have known that inside her chest, everything was collapsing. She went into the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the cold tile floor, pulled out the card, and read it one more time. Then she folded it again, pushed it deep into the inside pocket of her coat, and told herself she wouldn't tell anyone. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she was used to carrying everything alone, and because, deep down, she knew that if Tristan had to choose between his empire and her, the answer should have been obvious, and she didn't want to put him in the position of having to say that answer out loud. Corinne kept the card in her coat pocket for 2 days. For 2 days, she cooked porridge for Lorraine, watered the herbs in the kitchen, washed dishes with Dorothy, and carried that small piece of paper with the words, "Return the merchandise," or "Pay in blood" on her body like a ticking bomb, only she could hear. For 2 days, she watched Tristan pass through the hallway, watched Beck order more guards at the gate, watched the mansion tighten its security around her like a cocoon, and she understood that they knew, and they were protecting her. And that was exactly why she couldn't sleep. Because every extra guard at the gate was one more person who could die because of her. Every additional camera on the wall was another layer of defense Tristan had to build because she existed inside this house. And she had seen this before, had lived through this before, had watched Owen drag the people around him down with him until there was no one left. And in the end, there was only Owen alone in a warehouse in South Boston, with a bullet and a debt that would never be paid off. She wouldn't let that happen again. At 4 o'clock in the morning, on the 3rd day after reading the card, Corinne wrote a short letter on a piece of paper torn from Dorothy's notebook. "Thank you for giving me time. Thank you, Dorothy. Thank you, Mrs. Lorraine. I can't stay and watch anyone else die because of me. No signature. No need." She placed the letter on the bed, folded the blanket neatly as if no one had ever slept there, and took her worn-out backpack from the corner of the closet. It was light, with only one old change of clothes inside, the nursing book Dorothy had given her, and the wrinkled photograph of Owen tucked into the small inner pocket. She put back on the clothes she had worn the night by the river, washed clean now, but still frayed at the elbows, still thin, still not warm enough. Tristan's leather coat lay across the back of the chair. She looked at it for 3 seconds, then turned away. She didn't take it. She didn't carry anything that wasn't hers. The hallway was dark. The staircase was silent. She walked on the tips of her toes, light and slow, the way she had moved for 3 months on the street when she needed to pass through dangerous places without being noticed. As she passed Lorraine's room, she stopped for 1 second, listening to the older woman's steady breathing through the half-closed door, and she had to bite her lip so she wouldn't think about the blood pressure pill that no one would place beside Lorraine's bed tomorrow morning. She kept going, out the back door, across the yard, toward the west side gate, where she had watched for the past 2 days and learned that the guards changed shifts at 4:15, leaving a 2-minute gap between the 2 shifts. 2 minutes, enough to get through the gate if she ran. She reached the side gate at 4:12. 3 more minutes. She stood in the darkness, backpack on her shoulder, heart racing but breath steady, and told herself this was the right thing. This was how she protected them. This was the only way she knew how to love someone, by leaving before her presence killed them. "What are you doing?" Tristan's voice cut through the darkness behind her. Corinne froze, didn't turn around. Her heart dropped into the pit of her stomach. He stepped out from the corner of the eastern wall, a place she hadn't checked because she hadn't thought anyone would be standing there at 4 o'clock in the morning. But Tristan Valenti didn't sleep at 4 o'clock in the morning. He rarely slept before 5. And tonight, when the camera reported movement in the first-floor hallway, he had known it was her before he even looked at the screen. "Where are you going?" he asked again, closer now. His voice not angry, not cold, only tired, the kind of tired she had heard on the night they sat drinking tea in the kitchen. Corinne turned around, looked at him, looked at those gray eyes in the darkness, and she knew he had read the letter, or he didn't need to read it, because he already knew, because the backpack on her shoulder and the old clothes on her body said everything the letter didn't have to say. "Away from here. Before I get anyone else killed. Owen died because of me. Because I couldn't pay his debt for him. Because I didn't have enough money. Wasn't good enough. Wasn't enough of anything to save him. Her voice broke, but her eyes were dry. She had cried all her tears for Owen 6 months ago. And now Murano has come here because of me. That bouquet was because of me. Everything you've had to do, increasing security, adding more guards, all of it is because of me. And if I stay, you'll die because of me too, like Owen. Silence. Then Tristan spoke, and what he said left Corinne standing frozen in place as if someone had pulled all the air from her lungs. Owen didn't die because of you. She looked at him, not understanding. Or understanding but not believing, because no one, not one person in the past 6 months, in all 27 years of her life, had ever said that to her. Your brother died because of his own choices. Tristan's voice wasn't gentle, wasn't comforting. He only told the truth in the voice of a man who had seen too much death to decorate it with lies. He chose gambling. He chose to borrow money from Murano. He chose not to stop when he still could, and you dropped out of school to take care of him. You worked 2 shifts to pay his debts. You sacrificed everything you had, your career, your future, your life, to keep him alive. He stopped for 1 second. You didn't kill Owen. Murano killed Owen. And you did more than anyone had the right to ask of you. Corinne felt something break inside her chest. Not break like ruin. Break like ice cracking. Like a wall collapsing. Like a door she had kept locked for 6 months, suddenly being forced open from the outside by someone she never expected. She cried. Not the exhausted crying under the pier on the night by the river. Not the crying she had held back in the bathroom after Lorraine said those cruel things. This was the crying of someone who had finally, been looked in the eyes and told that it wasn't her fault, that she had done enough, that she didn't have to keep punishing herself anymore. The backpack slipped from her shoulder and fell to the ground. She stood there crying, and Tristan stood 3 steps away from her, not moving closer, not hugging her, not touching her, only staying there, because he knew that sometimes what a person needed wasn't arms around them, but simply the presence of someone who didn't leave. "Why are you keeping me?" she asked through her tears. The truth. A long silence. So long that Corinne thought he wouldn't answer. Then Tristan spoke, his voice lower, quieter, as if the sentence was too heavy to say aloud. "Because the night I found you, I had just taken a man's life. Because for 4 years, all I've known how to do is destroy. Kill, threaten, ruin. That's all I do. And that night, for the first time in 4 years, I wanted to save someone instead of destroy them." She looked at him in the darkness. He looked back at her. They stood 3 steps apart at the side gate at 4 o'clock in the morning. One person who had just tried to run, and one person who had just said something he had never said to anyone. Corinne bent down and picked up her backpack. Tristan didn't move, didn't breathe, only waited. She turned her back to the gate, stepped toward the mansion, and this time, for the first time since the night by the river, Corinne Walsh didn't stay because she was afraid. Didn't stay because she had nowhere left to run. Didn't stay because of an agreement. She stayed because she chose to stay. Perry Gould had been waiting for this moment for years. 40 years old, underboss of the Valenti family since Tristan first took command, Perry had swallowed every order, nodded at every decision, and hidden his resentment beneath a layer of loyalty so thick that even Tristan couldn't see through it. Perry didn't hate Tristan. Perry thought Tristan was good. Maybe better than his father, but good in the way he had been 4 years ago, before Nina, when Tristan was a blade, cold, precise, without hesitation. The Tristan from 4 years ago would never have brought a homeless girl back to the mansion. The Tristan from 4 years ago would have heard Murano's threat, handed the girl over within an hour, and used the incident as political leverage. But the Tristan now said no in the voice of a man, not the voice of a boss. And to Perry, that was undeniable proof that Tristan had become weak. Perry contacted Murano on the 5th day after the bouquet incident. The call was short, made from a disposable phone bought at a convenience store outside town. 3 minutes, just enough to exchange 2 things. Perry handed over the mansion's security layout, the camera positions, the guard's shift change schedule, and confirmation that Corinne was still inside the house. In return, Murano would help Perry overthrow Tristan, put Perry in his place, and redraw the territory in East Manhattan. A clean transaction, no emotion, exactly the way Perry had always believed a boss should operate. The attack came 12 days later, 3 o'clock in the morning. Perry shut down the West Gate security system from the control room inside the mansion, where he had access because he was the underboss, because Tristan trusted him, because 10 years of false loyalty had purchased a level of access no outside enemy could ever buy. 8 Murano gunmen came in through the West Gate, fast, professional, dividing into 2 groups of 4. One group heading toward the second-floor bedrooms, the other sweeping the first floor. The first gunshot rang out when the guard on duty in the first-floor hallway spotted the intruders. 2 shots, 3 shots. Then gunfire burst in rapid succession like fireworks, tearing through the silence of the mansion, tearing through every illusion of safety that the high walls and cameras had created. Beck reacted in 4 seconds. 4 seconds from the first gunshot to the moment he was already in the second-floor hallway, gun in hand, shouting orders through the radio. Safe room, get Mrs. Lorraine into the safe room now. 2 guards on the second floor pulled Lorraine out of bed. She fought them because she was Lorraine Valenti, and she hadn't run from anything in 65 years. But the guards didn't listen. They listened to Beck's order, and within 15 seconds, Lorraine was inside the armored safe room in the basement, the door locked from within, thick enough to withstand a grenade. Tristan wasn't in his bedroom when the gunfire started. He was in his study, awake, as he was every night. And when he heard the first shot, he didn't pick up his phone, didn't call Beck, didn't check the cameras. He took the gun from his desk drawer, went out the door, and ran in only one direction, the kitchen. Because he knew Corinne was there, because she was always there at 3 o'clock in the morning, sitting under the yellow light, reading her nursing book, and in the moment the gunfire tore through the night, Tristan's mind didn't calculate tactics, didn't assess the situation, didn't analyze the threat. It said only one word: Corinne. He ran down the stairs, through the dark hallway, hearing gunfire in front of him and behind him, hearing Beck shouting through the radio, hearing glass shatter somewhere on the first floor, and he didn't stop, didn't take cover, didn't move carefully. He ran. He reached the kitchen and saw her. Corinne stood pressed against the wall, her nursing book fallen on the floor, her face white but her eyes clear. The eyes of someone so used to fear that fear no longer paralyzed her, only made her sharper. And between her and the door stood a Murano gunman, his back turned to Tristan, his handgun aimed straight at her chest. 3 seconds. That was all the time it took. In the first second, Tristan raised his gun. In the second, he fired. In the third, the Murano gunman fell to the kitchen floor and didn't get back up. No hesitation. No warning. No shouted order to stand still or put the gun down. Just raise, fire, drop. Precise, cold, merciless, the way a machine handled a system error. Not a hero saving a beauty. A killer eliminating a threat. Corinne saw everything. Saw the way Tristan fired without changing expression. The way he took a man down with the calm of someone who had done this so many times it had become muscle memory. The way those gray eyes didn't blink, didn't waver, didn't regret. She saw the monster Lorraine had hinted at, the one Beck had known, the one the whole city feared. And that monster had just saved her life. 15 minutes later, it was over. Murano pulled his men back. This was a probe, not a full assault. 8 gunmen had entered, but only 5 came out, 3 left lying on the floor of the Valenti mansion. Beck took control of the situation, checked casualties, locked the gates, and reactivated the security system. Lorraine was safe in the armored room. Dorothy was shaking but unharmed, hiding in the basement laundry room. The mansion fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes after a storm, heavier, thicker, smelling of gunpowder. Tristan stood in the middle of the kitchen. At his feet, the Murano gunman lay motionless. Blood was on the tile floor, on his hands, on the cuff of his shirt, like the night by the river, always blood on his sleeve, as if it were the uniform of his life. Corinne stood against the wall, still not moving, looking at him. He looked back at her, and he said, in an empty voice, in the voice of a man who had just confirmed the thing he had always known about himself, "This is me. This is what you're living with." Corinne trembled. Her whole body trembled, from her fingertips to her shoulders, the kind of shaking she couldn't control, the kind the body gives in to when the mind hasn't had time to finish processing what just happened. She had just watched a man get shot dead 3 steps away from her. She had just watched the man she drank tea with at 3 o'clock in the morning kill someone without changing expression. She had just heard him say, "This is me. This is what you're living with," in the voice of a man waiting for her to run. She didn't run. She didn't know why. Maybe because she had been running for 6 months and her legs were tired. Maybe because she had seen enough darkness in her life to know that darkness wasn't always the enemy. Maybe because when Tristan shot that gunman, he didn't shoot because he enjoyed killing. He shot because Corinne was behind the barrel of that other gun, and she knew the difference between violence done for pleasure and violence done to protect. She had lived long enough in the world Owen had dragged her into to know the difference. Corinne walked to the sink, took a clean kitchen towel, turned on the warm water, and wrung it out. Her hands were still shaking, but she forced them to work, forced them to remember the process. Just like the night Lorraine's blood pressure dropped, when her body knew how to care for someone even while her mind was in chaos, she stepped in front of Tristan. He stood still, his gun already set down on the kitchen table, both hands hanging at his sides, blood on his fingers, on the backs of his hands, on the cuffs of his shirt. She took his left hand. He flinched slightly, a reflex, the muscles beneath his skin tightening like steel wire struck by a hard tap. 4 years. 4 years since anyone had touched this hand with anything other than violence. 4 years in which this hand had only known how to hold a gun, grip a collar, close around a throat. No one had lifted it to clean it. No one had touched it with tenderness. Tenderness had died with Nina in the car seat 4 years ago. Corinne wiped the blood from his fingers, slowly, one finger at a time, the warm towel moving over his skin, and she said nothing. She only wiped. "What are you doing?" His voice was hoarse, low, as if the question had to pass through something very heavy in his throat before it could get out. "What someone should have done for you a long time ago." Corinne didn't look up, her eyes fixed on his hand as she wiped away each streak of blood, as if this were the most important task in the world. "Taking care of you after you've had to do terrible things." Tristan stood still, completely still. And then he shook, not from cold, not from fear, but because something inside him broke open. Something he had sealed shut for 4 years with whiskey and violence and emptiness. Something he had believed was completely dead, until a girl lifted his blood-stained hand and cleaned it with a warm towel, as if he were someone who deserved to be cared for. Tristan Valenti, the boss who made the entire east coast of America afraid, was shaking because a girl was wiping blood from his hands. She finished cleaning his left hand and moved to his right. He let her. Didn't pull away, didn't push her back, didn't say you're here because of an agreement. Don't confuse it with anything else. He only stood there and let someone touch him for the first time in 4 years without wanting to kill him. The next morning, Beck traced it. The security cameras had recorded everything, and when Beck reviewed the footage, he saw Perry Gould walk into the control room at 2:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before the first gunshot, and shut down the West Gate security system. A 20-second operation. No rushing, no hesitation, the movements of a man who had planned it and rehearsed it inside his head many times. Clear evidence, impossible to deny. Beck brought the footage to Tristan. Tristan watched it once, said nothing, then ordered Perry brought up to the study. 2 men. The door closed. Perry stood in the middle of the room, not tied up, not restrained, because until this moment, he was still the underboss, still armed, still allowed to move freely through the mansion. Tristan sat behind the desk, in the boss's position, and looked at Perry with the eyes Perry had misread for 10 years. The eyes Perry had thought were cold because they held no emotion, when in truth they were cold because the emotion had been buried too deep. "I trusted you for 10 years. Tristan spoke flatly. "For 10 years, you stood beside me. You knew the security codes, the schedules, every weak point in this house, because I trusted you the way I trusted myself." Perry didn't deny it, didn't apologize. He looked at Tristan with the eyes of a man who had prepared himself for this moment. "You changed." Perry's voice was hard, without regret. "You got weak because of that girl. You kept her when you should have handed her over. You said no when you should have said yes. The organization needs a strong leader, Tristan. Not a lovesick man who brings a burden home and risks everything for it." Silence. Tristan looked at Perry for a long time, looked at the face he had once trusted, the eyes he had once read as loyal, and wondered what sign he had missed, or whether Perry had acted so well there had been no sign to miss at all. "How much strength does it take not to kill?" "Perry." Tristan stood slowly. "You think keeping a person alive is weakness? You think choosing to protect instead of destroy is softness?" He walked around the desk and stood in front of Perry, close enough for Perry to see every line of his face. "You never understood that, and you never will." Get out. Leave Valenti. If I see your face again, I won't talk first. Perry stood still for 3 seconds, waiting for the bullet, waiting for the death he knew he deserved by the laws of this world. But it didn't come. Tristan opened the door, Perry walked out, and 10 years of false loyalty vanished through that doorway. Beck stood outside in the hallway, heard everything, and when Perry disappeared from sight, he stepped inside, his face tense. You know he'll run straight to Murano. I know. Then why not finish it? Tristan looked out the window, where morning light was pushing through the curtains, and he thought of Corinne standing in the kitchen the night before, wiping blood from his hands with a warm towel, and he thought of what she had said, taking care of you after you've had to do terrible things. And he wondered whether he could do one less terrible thing today. Just one. Just this once. Because I want to be something else. Tristan said it so quietly that Beck had to tilt his head to hear, even if only once. Beck looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, not agreeing but accepting, because 15 years at Tristan Valenti's side had taught him that there were some decisions a boss made that a consigliere could only record and prepare for the consequences. Lorraine Valenti couldn't sleep the night after the attack, not because she was afraid. She had lived through worse nights. The night her husband was shot in front of a restaurant in Little Italy. The night she held 21-year-old Tristan as he shook in his father's study, while the smell of gunpowder still hadn't faded. The night Nina died and she had to watch her son turn into someone she no longer recognized. No, Lorraine didn't lose sleep because she was afraid. She lost sleep because of Corinne. From the safe room in the basement, she hadn't seen anything. But Dorothy told her everything. Told her that when the gunfire started, Corinne didn't run. Told her that when it was all over, Corinne didn't scream, didn't collapse, didn't demand an explanation. She took a warm towel and wiped the blood from Tristan's hands. Wiped the blood from her son's hands. Lorraine lay in bed thinking about that all night. The 4 nurses she had driven away over the past 2 years, none had lasted more than 3 weeks. None had endured her sharp tongue. None had stayed when she pushed them out. Corinne had been there for 3 weeks now, had been called a ghost by her, had been compared to Nina by her, had been insulted every morning when she placed the medicine beside the bed. And still she placed the medicine there every morning. Still cooked porridge every evening. Still sat through the night watching over her when her blood pressure dropped, her hand holding Lorraine's wrist as she counted her pulse, falling asleep in the chair without one word of complaint. Then last night, when 8 gunmen stormed the mansion, when every reason in the world told her to run because this wasn't her war, because this wasn't her family, because she was only an outsider dragged into it, she didn't run. She stayed and wiped the blood from her son's hands. The next afternoon, Lorraine called Corinne into her room. Corinne came, knocked softly, and stepped inside with the carefulness of someone used to being attacked by Lorraine's words and always ready to take one more blow. But today Lorraine wasn't sitting on the bed with her familiar frozen expression. She sat in the armchair by the window, the afternoon light falling across her face, and in her hand was an old black and white photograph, its edges yellowed with age. Lorraine didn't look up when Corinne entered. She looked at the photograph, and when she spoke, her voice wasn't sharp, wasn't cold, wasn't cruel, only tired. This was me at 23. Corinne stepped closer. The photograph showed a young woman with black hair and gray eyes, standing beside an older man in a dark suit, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket. The woman in the picture wasn't smiling. She was beautiful, but frightened. And that fear was clear even in black and white. Clear in the way she held the baby too tightly, in the way she stood slightly angled away from the man beside her, close enough to belong but far enough to run. I married when I had nothing, Lorraine spoke slowly, each word like something being dug up from a place buried very deep. My parents were in Bensonhurst, an immigrant family with nothing but a small tailor shop and debt. My husband was 12 years older than me. He was terrifying. Everyone was afraid of him, and so was I. She stopped, her finger touching the man's face in the photograph lightly. I also thought I didn't belong in this world. I also thought I would be swallowed whole. I also wondered every day whether I had made the greatest mistake of my life. Corinne stood still, barely daring to breathe, because she knew this was something Lorraine had never told anyone, and one wrong reaction would make her shut this barely open door forever. My son is like his father. Lorraine looked up, gray eyes meeting Corinne's green ones. Strong, dangerous, ruthless when he has to be. But inside, beneath all those layers of steel, he needs a place where he doesn't have to be ruthless. My husband needed that. Tristan needs it too. She set the photograph down on her lap. "I hate admitting that you might be that place." The words were heavy. Heavy because Lorraine Valenti didn't admit anything unless she had weighed it from every angle, and concluded that the truth was the truth, whether she liked it or not. Corinne swallowed, her throat tight. "Ma'am, I'm not here because of his money. Not because of power. Not because of the mansion or the protection." Her voice trembled slightly, but it didn't break. "I'm here because he was the first person, the only person, who looked at me and saw a human being. Not a problem to solve. Not a burden to remove. Not a thing at all. Just a human being." A long silence followed. Then Lorraine did something Dorothy would later tell Corinne she had never done for anyone outside blood family in all 65 years of her life. She stood, walked to the small tea table by the window, poured tea from the white porcelain pot she always kept ready every afternoon, poured it into 2 cups, and placed 1 cup in front of Corinne. In the Valenti house, pouring tea for someone was a way of saying, "You're allowed to sit down." A way of saying, "I see you." An acceptance that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Corinne held the teacup with both hands, and she didn't cry. She didn't cry. But her eyes stung so badly she had to look down into the tea for 3 seconds before drinking. That night, Tristan found Corinne in the kitchen. Not at 3 o'clock in the morning. At 10 o'clock at night. Earlier than usual, he sat down in the chair across from her, the place that had become his though no one had assigned it, and for the first time, he spoke first. "Nina was shot in the car." Corinne set the book down. "She was driving home after dinner with me. The shooter was aiming for my car but hit hers by mistake. 2 identical cars, black, the same make, parked beside each other. 1 bullet went through the glass and hit her in the chest." His voice was flat, as if he were reading the news, but his hand gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "She died in my arms outside the hospital. I held her and screamed her name, and no one came fast enough. And when they finally came, there was nothing left to save. Silence. Everyone who gets close to me dies." Corinne looked at him, looked into the gray eyes that, for the first time, didn't seem cold to her, only afraid. Afraid down to the bone. Afraid in the way only someone who had lost everything knew how to be afraid. Afraid because he was beginning to have something to lose again. "I'm still here." She said it softly. "That's what scares me." He said it, and his voice broke on the last word. Only a little. Just enough for Corinne to hear the man behind the boss. "Fear means you still have something to lose," Corinne said. "And having something to lose means you're still alive." Tristan looked at her. She looked back. Then, slowly, she placed her hand on the table, palm open, not grabbing, not pulling, just placed there, open, waiting. He looked at her hand for 10 seconds. 10 seconds that Corinne counted 1 by 1. Then he placed his hand over hers, closed around it. 2 hands holding each other across the oak table in the dark kitchen. No candles, no music, no confession of love. Only 2 people holding hands like 2 children, afraid of the dark, knowing the dark wouldn't become any less dark. But at least they didn't have to be afraid alone. Perry Gould ran to Murano within 48 hours of being exiled, exactly as Beck had warned, down to every detail Beck had said would happen when Tristan chose mercy instead of a bullet. Perry brought everything with him. The new security layout Beck had put in place after the attack, the additional camera positions, the changed guard rotation schedule, the updated system passwords, and most important, the one thing Murano wanted to hear most, confirmation that Corinne Walsh was Tristan Valenti's fatal weakness. Not a strategic weakness. A human weakness. The kind of weakness Perry had witnessed with his own eyes, when Tristan ran through 3 hallways under gunfire, without taking cover, without calculating, only running toward the kitchen because she was there. The kind of weakness that the Tristan of 10 years ago would have cut out of himself the moment he discovered it. Franco Murano listened and smiled for the first time in months. He didn't need to attack Valenti. He only needed the girl. The plan was simple, because the most effective plans were always simple. Take Corinne Walsh. Use her as leverage. Force Tristan to surrender East Manhattan, the richest territory the 2 families had fought over for 10 years. No need for war. No need for more blood. Just 1 girl and 1 boss who had forgotten how to look away. Corinne left the mansion on a Tuesday morning, 11 days after the night she and Tristan held hands in the kitchen. Lorraine had run out of blood pressure medicine, the specific medication her private doctor prescribed that was only available at 1 pharmacy in town, 15 minutes by car from the mansion. Dorothy offered to go, But Corinne said she would do it. She wanted to do it. And the real reason went deeper than a trip to buy medicine. She needed to go outside. She needed to prove to herself that she wasn't a prisoner, that staying was a choice and not captivity, that she still had the ability to walk through that iron gate and come back on her own 2 feet. Beck sent one guard with her. Corinne didn't object. She had learned that in this world, protection wasn't control. It was what kept her alive. But Beck didn't know Perry had given Morano-Lorraine's highly specific medication schedule, allowing the enemy to plan with terrifying precision. Morano didn't just send a few thugs. He deployed a coordinated hit squad that had been staging the perimeter for days. The moment Corinne stepped out of the pharmacy with the medication bag in her hand, a staged delivery truck intentionally rammed into the guard's car, cutting off any chance of backup. Before the guard could even draw his weapon, he was blindsided and overwhelmed by 3 armed men. In a flash of brutal, professional efficiency, Corinne was gagged and dragged into a waiting white van parked tight against the curb before she could even raise a cry for help. She fought back. She kicked, clawed, bit the hand covering her mouth until it bled, because 3 months on the street had taught her that when someone grabbed you, you fought back, fought with everything you had, because if you let them take you where they wanted, you would never leave. But there were 2 men twice her size, and she was thin, and she was tired. And in the end, they pinned her to the floor of the van, tied her hands behind her back, blindfolded her, and she heard the van door shut like the lid of a coffin closing. The message reached Tristan's phone at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. He was in the study with Beck, reviewing the security system, when the phone vibrated. He opened the message. A photograph. Corinne sat on an iron chair, her hands tied behind her back, the left side of her face bruised where someone had hit her, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, but her eyes were open, looking straight into the camera. And in those eyes there were no tears, no pleading, only the ruthless calm of someone used to being knocked down by life and refusing to stay down. Beneath the photograph, 1 line of text: East Territory, or her. Tristan looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then he threw the phone into the wall. It shattered into 3 pieces, the screen going dark, but the photograph had already burned itself into his eyes. He would see it every time he closed them from now until he brought her home. That bruised face, that bleeding corner of her mouth, those calm eyes. He slammed his fist down on the desk, once, twice, until his knuckles split and his blood dripped onto the wood. Beck said nothing. Beck stood still and waited, because he knew what was coming, and he knew the most dangerous part wasn't the rage. The most dangerous part came after the rage. Tristan stopped hitting the desk, sat back down, and went silent. 60 seconds. Beck counted them in his head, because he had seen this silence before, the night Nina died. 60 seconds of absolute silence before Tristan stood up, and became the thing the entire East Coast paid for during the 4 years that followed. Beck called that silence the storm before the killing. 60 seconds passed. Tristan opened his eyes. I'm going. You can't go alone. Going alone into Morano territory is suicide. Tristan looked at Beck, and Beck saw that those gray eyes weren't cold anymore, weren't empty anymore. They were burning. Burning in a way Beck hadn't seen in 4 years. Burning in a way Beck had only seen once before, the night Nina died. But that time it had been the fire of destruction, and this time it was the fire of something else. Something Beck didn't dare name. I'm going. You cover me. Final decision. Beck looked at him for 3 seconds. Then he nodded, because in 15 years at Tristan Valenti's side, Beck had never once defeated that kind of 60-second silence. The warehouse sat in the industrial district of South Newark, between 2 rows of abandoned storage buildings that Morano used as transfer points for moving goods from the port inland. Beck identified the location within 3 hours, not because it was hard to find, but because Morano hadn't bothered to hide it. He wanted Tristan to find it. He wanted Tristan to come, because that was part of the plan, forcing the Valenti boss to the negotiating table by placing the thing he wanted most right in the middle of enemy territory. Tristan said he was going alone. Beck didn't listen. 15 years as consigliere had taught Beck that there were orders that had to be obeyed, and there were orders that had to be disobeyed to keep the boss alive, and this was the second kind. Beck brought 6 men, the most loyal men left after the Perry betrayal, men who had been with Valenti long enough to understand that tonight wasn't a normal assignment. Tonight the boss wasn't going because of territory or money or power. Tonight the boss was going because of something none of them dared say aloud. but all of them could see on his face. 2 black cars stopped 200 meters from the warehouse. Beck sent 4 men to circle the outside and kept 2 with him, moving close behind. Tristan didn't wait. He walked straight through the warehouse's front door alone, gun in his hand, but not raised yet, because he knew Morano wouldn't kill Corinne before the negotiation. She was a hostage, and a hostage only had value while alive. And Morano was a man who calculated by profit, not emotion. Inside, the warehouse was wide and open, industrial lights shining down from above, cold and white, making everything look like an operating room. Franco Morano stood in the center, 2 gunmen on either side, wearing a light gray suit and a neatly knotted tie, as if he were going to dinner instead of kidnapping women. Perry stood behind him, face tight, eyes flicking to Tristan, and then away. The eyes of a traitor still clear-headed enough to know he was standing on the wrong side. And Corinne. She sat on an iron chair in the middle of the warehouse, her hands tied behind her back with plastic ties, the bruise on the left side of her face already turning purple, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, her shirt torn at the shoulder where she had fought back. But her eyes were open, looking straight ahead, not lowered, not crying, not begging. When Tristan walked in, her eyes found him immediately, and in those green eyes, he saw not a plea for rescue, but calm. The kind of calm she had learned from him, from the way he stood before Perry in the study, from the way he shot the gunman in the kitchen without blinking. Don't let the enemy see fear. She had learned that lesson. Franco smiled when he saw Tristan, a wide smile, the smile of a man who thought he had already won. Tristan Valenti. Trading an empire for a stray girl. He shook his head slowly, wearing false pity like a mask. Your father would be ashamed. Tristan stopped 10 steps from Franco, looked at Corinne, looked back at Franco. My father died because he thought power was the only thing worth having. His voice was flat, not angry, not afraid, only speaking the truth in the voice of a man who had lived with the truth long enough that he no longer needed to decorate it. He died outside a restaurant in Little Italy because no one loved him enough to warn him that his enemies were coming. I won't make that mistake. Franco stopped smiling. Everything happened in 15 seconds. Beck and 2 men struck from the west side door at the exact moment Tristan moved. Fast, precise. The kind of coordinated formation Beck and Tristan had run hundreds of times in 15 years. The kind of coordination that didn't need spoken orders because it lived in muscle, in breath, in the way 2 men knew where the other would be before he got there. 2 Morano gunmen went down before they could raise their weapons. Franco drew his gun, but Tristan was already in front of him, knocking his arm aside, driving him down onto the concrete floor, and standing over him with the barrel pointed straight at his forehead. 15 seconds. Over. Tristan looked down at Franco Morano lying on the floor, fear flickering for the first time in his eyes, and he wanted to pull the trigger. He wanted to end the man who had sent funeral flowers to his front gate, the man who had kidnapped Corinne, the man who had killed Owen Walsh, the man who had turned the woman he cared about into merchandise on a bargaining table. He wanted to pull the trigger so badly that his finger tightened around it 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters. Then another voice came from the corner of the warehouse. Please. Perry was kneeling on the floor, both hands raised, his face white, shaking. Please, Tristan. I was wrong. I'll do anything. Please don't. Perry Gould, the man who had called mercy weakness, the man who had said the organization needed a strong leader, not a lovesick man, the man who had betrayed 10 years of loyalty because he believed compassion was a flaw. Now he was kneeling on the warehouse floor, begging for the very thing he had despised. Tristan looked at Perry, looked at Franco, then looked at Corinne. She sat in the chair, hands still tied, face bruised, and she looked at him. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, didn't say kill or spare. She only looked, with the same eyes he had first seen beneath the pier by the Hudson River. Eyes that didn't demand, didn't judge. She let him choose for himself. Tristan lowered the gun. Beck stepped forward, cuffed Franco and Perry, and over the next 2 hours, the hidden agreement Beck had spent weeks preparing with the FBI Organized Crime Task Force at 26 Federal Plaza was activated. Franco Morano and Perry Gould became cooperating federal witnesses in exchange for information on Morano's entire money laundering and human trafficking network. The Morano family collapsed not because of war, but because of paperwork, because of lawyers, because of a system Beck had patiently built for this exact moment. And Valenti was cleaned up without one more drop of blood. When the warehouse fell quiet, when the FBI had come and gone, when Beck and the men stood outside waiting, Tristan stepped in front of Corinne. He knelt down, took a knife, and cut the plastic ties binding her wrists. And when the ties snapped, when her wrists were free, he lifted both her hands gently, as if holding something that might break, and his hands were shaking. Beck stood at the warehouse door, looking in. And in 15 years beside Tristan Valenti, this was the first and only time he had ever seen those hands shake. "I'm sorry," Tristan said it with his voice breaking. Corinne looked at him, her face bruised, her lips split, but her eyes bright. Bright in the way eyes only become bright when they see something they have been searching for a very long time. "You came," she said. "That was everything." Tristan pulled her into his arms, held her in the middle of the cold concrete warehouse, the smell of gunpowder still hanging in the air, the cold white industrial lights shining down on them, 6 of his men standing outside and watching, and Tristan Valenti didn't care. For the first time in 4 years, he didn't care who was watching. 3 months after the night at the warehouse in Newark, the Valenti mansion looked the same, but it was no longer the same. The walls were still high, the cameras still ran, the guards still patrolled, but inside, something had shifted, not loudly, not with any announcement, only shifting the way the ground shifts after an earthquake. Everything still standing, but standing in a new place. Tristan began moving part of the family's operations into legitimate business. Real estate in Westchester, construction in Lower Manhattan, an Italian restaurant in Tribeca that Beck said was for laundering money, but Tristan said no. This restaurant is clean. Every dollar goes through the books. Every invoice can be audited. Beck asked why. Tristan didn't say because of Corinne. Didn't say because I want to become a good man. Because he didn't think he would ever become a good man. He said because I want to build something that doesn't need blood to keep it standing. But Beck understood. Beck always understood. Tristan wanted to build something that Corinne could look at without having to look away. Corinne enrolled in the LPN program at CUNY Community College. Evening classes. 12 months. Beginning again from the same chapters she had read over and over in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning during those first weeks. By day, she worked as the administrative manager for the legitimate side of the business, handling appointments, invoices, suppliers, partners, all the things she had never been formally trained to do but was instinctively good at. Because 7 years of raising her younger brother by herself, paying bills by herself, juggling 2 shifts to keep Owen in school, had forged in her a kind of organization no classroom could teach. Tristan watched her work and saw what he had seen on the very first night by the river. Beneath the hunger and fear, beneath 3 months on the street and 6 months of running, there was a capable woman, a woman with will, with fire, who only needed someone not to put it out. Lorraine changed in a way only Dorothy noticed, because Dorothy had been in this house long enough to read the changes Lorraine Valenti would never say aloud. She began coming down to the kitchen every Sunday afternoon. The first week, she only sat, drank tea, and watched Corinne and Dorothy cook. The second week, she remarked that Corinne was cutting the onions wrong. The third week, she stood up, took the knife from Corinne's hand, and said, "If you want to do it properly, watch me." Then she taught Corinne how to make Sunday sauce. Tomato sauce simmered slowly for 4 hours, her mother's recipe, the one her mother had brought from Naples to Bensonhurst in 1962. The recipe she had only taught Nina before, and before Nina had taught no one, because in her family's tradition, Sunday sauce was only passed down to women she considered family. When Corinne understood what that meant, when Dorothy explained it with her eyes and one small nod, she stood in front of the stove, wooden spoon in hand, the sauce bubbling softly in the pot, and cried, not loudly, silently, tears running down her cheeks while her hand kept stirring, because she had lost her mother at 19, lost Owen at 26, lost every family she had ever had, and now a 65-year-old woman was standing beside her in the kitchen, teaching her how to make the family sauce. And that was Lorraine Valenti's way of saying she belonged here. "Your tears are going to make the sauce salty. Stop it." Lorraine said it curtly, her eyes on the pot, not on Corinne, but her hand reached out and patted Corinne's back, lightly, quickly, almost too small to notice. Then she pulled her hand back at once, as if afraid she would become too soft if she left it there 1 second longer. That was Lorraine Valenti's version of "I love you," and Corinne understood. The LPN graduation ceremony took place on a rainy Friday evening, in the small auditorium of the community college. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, a speaker who talked too long, And Corinne sat among 42 other students in a graduation gown she had borrowed because she couldn't afford to buy one. And she couldn't believe this was real. In the audience row, there were 4 people. Tristan wore a dark suit, sat upright, his face expressionless, looking as if he were attending a board meeting rather than a community college graduation. Lorraine sat beside him, back straight, one hand around her cane, her eyes following Corinne with an expression she would deny if anyone asked. But Dorothy knew it was pride. Dorothy had been wiping her eyes with a handkerchief since the 5th minute of the ceremony. Beck stood by the door, eyes scanning the room out of habit. But when the name Corinne Walsh was called, when she walked up to receive her certificate, Beck clapped, and even he hadn't expected himself to do that. That night, after Lorraine had gone up to her room and Dorothy had gone home, Tristan found Corinne on the west balcony. She stood, looking out over the oak trees, still wearing the dress Dorothy had lent her for the ceremony, her hair damp from the rain, her certificate in a plastic sleeve in her hand. He stood beside her, didn't look at her, looked out into the darkness ahead, because there were some things that could only be said when you weren't looking into the other person's eyes. I love you. No flowers, no candles, no music. Just 3 words spoken on a balcony at 11 o'clock at night, his voice cracking on the last word, the voice of a man who hadn't said those 3 words to anyone in 4 years and had forgotten how to say them without shaking. Corinne didn't turn around. I know. He turned to look at her. You know? Since the night you put the coat on the ground instead of handing it directly to me. Corinne turned and looked at him, because a man who doesn't know how to love doesn't think about stepping back so someone else doesn't have to be afraid. A man who doesn't know how to love forces, demands, takes. You set it down and stepped back. That was when I knew. Silence. Light rain fell on the balcony railing, soft, steady, like a clock counting time. I love you too. Her voice was so small he had to tilt his head to hear it. And that scares me more than Murano, more than 3 months on the street, more than the night in the warehouse, because Murano could only hurt me on the outside. You could hurt me somewhere much deeper. Tristan raised his hand and touched her face gently, his fingertips moving over the bruise on her cheek that had almost healed, and he wanted to promise, wanted to say, I'll never hurt you, but he had lived long enough to know that promises like that were lies, because he was Tristan Valenti, and his life was something that swallowed every promise whole. Don't promise, Corinne said, as if she had read his thoughts. Just be here, every day. He kissed her, the first kiss, not soft, not sweet, desperate, like 2 drowning people grabbing hold of each other in a black sea, not knowing where the shore was, not knowing whether the next wave would drag them both under, only knowing that holding on to each other was the only thing that still meant anything. And on the balcony of the Valenti mansion, beneath the light rain, 2 broken people finally stopped breaking further. 1 year after the night by the Hudson River, Corinne Walsh wore a white blouse to work every morning at a community clinic in the South Bronx, where she cared for people without health insurance, homeless people, single mothers who couldn't afford medical care, old men sleeping on the street with pneumonia, because a New York winter had mercy on no one. People just like the woman she had been 1 year earlier, invisible, exhausted, and convinced that no one saw them. Tristan funded the clinic anonymously, because the Valenti name on donation papers wouldn't help a clinic serving the poor. It would only make people afraid or suspicious, so he hid it, letting the money arrive without carrying darkness with it. And that was also the way Tristan loved, without display, without demanding recognition, only doing what needed to be done and stepping back. Lorraine still lived with them in the mansion, her health steady now because she took her medicine every morning without needing anyone to remind her. She was still difficult, still sharp-tongued, but the difficulty was different now. The kind where she called Corinne stubborn girl every time Corinne came home late from the clinic, the kind where she kept a portion of hot Sunday sauce on the stove even while saying, I'm not waiting for you, the kind that made Dorothy laugh and say that was her way of saying daughter-in-law. One late autumn evening, after a long shift at the clinic, Corinne didn't go home right away. She told Tristan she needed to walk for a while, and he nodded because he had learned that Corinne needed space to breathe, needed moments alone to remember who she was outside the mansion, outside the family. Outside him, she walked along the Hudson, the same road, the same riverbank, the same distant lights reflected across the black water. A cold wind blew in from Jersey, carrying the smell of salt and steel, and Corinne pulled her coat tighter around herself. A new coat, not Tristan's black leather one, because she still kept that coat in her closet as if keeping something sacred. This one was a coat she had bought for herself with her first paycheck from the clinic. Not expensive, not elegant, but hers. Then she heard it. Crying. Not loud crying. The small, broken, exhausted kind that she recognized instantly because she had made that exact sound 1 year ago in this exact place. Beneath the old pier, curled up in the darkness, was a young girl, wet, thin, clutching a backpack tightly to her chest, shaking so hard Corinne could see it from far away. Corinne stopped. She stood on the riverbank and looked down at that girl, and she saw herself. Saw the night when she had believed no one in this world would ever stop for her, the night when she had run out of reasons to keep going but her body wouldn't let her stop. Corinne took off her coat, the coat she had bought with her own wages. She set it on the ground, a few steps away from the girl. Then she stepped back, didn't hand it directly to her, didn't move closer, didn't create a situation where the girl had to be afraid or grateful. She only set it down and stepped back. Exactly the way a man had done for her 1 year earlier on this same riverbank. "When did you last eat?" The girl looked up, her eyes wild, the eyes of an animal backed into a corner, eyes Corinne recognized as if looking into a mirror. Silence. Then the girl answered, her voice hoarse and broken. 2 days. Maybe 3. Corinne sat down by the river. Not too close, not too far. Close enough for the girl to know she wasn't leaving. Far enough that the girl wouldn't feel trapped. "I once sat exactly where you're sitting." Corinne spoke softly, looking out at the river. 1 year ago. Right here. I was wet too. Hungry too. I also thought no one in this world could see me. The girl looked at her, and in those wild eyes, Corinne saw something stir. Not hope yet, not trust, only surprise that someone had stopped. Then someone did stop, Corinne said, and everything changed. Not because that person was rich, or powerful, or had influence, but because that person chose to see me when the whole world walked past. The girl looked at the coat on the ground, looked at Corinne, then slowly, trembling, she reached out, took the coat, and wrapped it around her shoulders. Corinne watched the girl put on the coat, and she remembered the night she had worn Tristan's black leather coat, remembered the first warmth after 3 months of cold, remembered the moment she had closed her eyes for 1 second and allowed herself to feel that maybe she wasn't completely invisible, and she understood that this was the circle. Someone had stopped for her. She stopped for someone else. That someone else would stop for another person someday. Kindness didn't need to be grand. It didn't need millions of dollars. It didn't need empires or power or mansions or guards. Kindness only needed to be real. And sometimes, all it took to save a life was stopping. This story isn't only the story of a boss and a homeless girl. It's the story of who we choose to see. Every day, how many people do we walk past who are hurting, afraid, lonely, begging not with words, but with silence? And we step over them because we're busy, because we're afraid, because we think it isn't our concern. But if you stop, just once, just for a moment, you might change someone's entire life. And maybe, like Tristan, you'll discover that the person being saved isn't only them, but yourself too. If this story touched you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not invisible, that someone out there will stop for them. Please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next stories. Every day, we bring you stories that can heal, inspire, and remind you that in this world, which sometimes moves far too fast, kindness still exists, and it begins with very small things. How did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of someone in your real life? Someone who once stopped for you? Or a time when you wish you had stopped for someone but didn't in time? Share it with us in the comments. We read every line, and we want to hear the feelings from deep inside your heart, because every story you tell is also a way of stopping for someone else who is reading the comments and feeling a little less alone. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Thank you for being here until the very last minute. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.